At the onset, we didn't know what that looked like, but I knew one thing was for sure. When he asked me, I wanted to be involved. I don't want anybody else to ever walk through their career not thinking that there's an answer out there or there's a way for them to get help.
Welcome to Hey Chaplain. My name is Jared Altick, and I'm a chaplain with the police department. I make this podcast so that cops can hear encouragement from other cops. I know that not every cop is going to go sit down and have a cup of coffee with their chaplain, but it's my mission to bring encouragement and wisdom to police officers all around the world. On this podcast, you'll hear from detectives and dispatchers, U.S. Marshals and county sheriffs, and the occasional patrol officer from my hometown of Kansas City. From the LAPD to Scotland Yard, the guests on Hey Chaplain are giving you the wisdom gleaned from their experience so that you don't have to do everything the hard way. What if I told you that there's an organization that helps first responders find counseling in the area in which they live with qualified and experienced counselors who actually understand how to help cops and firefighters? And what if I told you that this was entirely anonymous and no one from your agency had to know about it? And finally, what if this organization that finds the counselors and vets the counselors and protects your anonymity will also pay for the first 5 sessions of the counseling? Well, that's what Compassion Alliance does. And I've brought in John Little to talk about it. John's not only the chairman of the board for Compassion Alliance, he's also a 20-year veteran homicide detective. Here's John Little from Compassion Alliance. Hello, John. How are you today?
Hey, Jared, I'm doing great. How about yourself?
I'm doing great. I met you back in October, and you guys came up to my booth, or maybe I came to yours. I don't recall, but we talked about having an interview, and I'm so glad that we're finally able to do it.
Me too. I'm glad. I'm glad and very appreciative that you've given us an opportunity to talk about the Compassion Alliance, and we really appreciate getting a chance to talk to your audience about what it is we do.
So, what is Compassion Alliance?
And so, the Compassion Alliance is a nonprofit that is targeted at first responders, and what we do is we help first responders get connected with therapy services.
Okay.
Whatever they're experiencing from the job, whether it's PTSD or anxiety, or just dealing with the horrible things that our first responders see on a daily basis, we get them connected with trauma-trained therapists that have experience in treating first responders, and then we cover the financial cost. And we do all of this very quietly. It doesn't have to involve the organization they work for. It's very private with them, and we just get them connected and get them the help that they need.
Why does Compassion Alliance need to exist? Can't everybody just go through EAP and the department will find you a doctor to go to?
That's a great question, actually. And so the reality is that we see all kinds of different things across this country when it comes to first responders. Some agencies are really, really good at this. The fire service in particular has kind of been on top of this issue for a while. Law enforcement, we're much slower to get on board with some of this. And some agencies are doing some really great things with this. And then some agencies haven't quite caught up with the times.
Yeah.
The other side of that is you have guys that have been doing this for a really long time that there's a stigma associated with seeking help. And nobody's ever told them it's okay to not be okay, with some of the things that you've experienced in your career.
You have both police culture and also just the inconsistency of one department to the next that both create reasons why an organization like yours needs to exist.
100%. Well stated.
What's your journey been like?
I've been in law enforcement for 20 years. I've worked in a couple of different states. I'm still actually an active cop now. I'm a homicide cop in the state of Florida, and I spent time working child crimes, sex crimes, but majority homicide is both a line level investigator and a supervisor over one of those units in two, pretty decent size metropolitan areas. So that's really been my career track over the last 20 years is I've spent a lot of time in homicide. I mean, I've worked alongside guys that ended up getting DUIs and just destroying their careers and their lives because they didn't know how to manage it. So they turned to drinking. Divorce rates. I mean, divorce rates among first responders are incredibly high. Why is that? Because you go home and you become completely withdrawn from your family and you isolate. You don't know how or don't want to talk to the people you love about those horrible things because you don't want to bring that on them. And so what ends up happening is you end up withdrawing and you end up isolating yourself. And those are some of the things that we can watch for in our coworkers too. How are they reacting? How are their dispositions changing? When they stop acting the way that they normally act, that can be a red flag. And you don't really realize there's something wrong a lot of times until it's too late. I've experienced officers that have committed suicide and nobody saw it coming. The founder of the Compassion Alliance, Tony Rodardi, he was my partner for nearly a decade. And I'll talk a little bit about his story because it's really become woven in to the fabric of who we are. Tony and his wife, Melody, they've been friends of mine for a lot of years now. And how the Compassion Alliance started is when Tony hit the end of his career, he realized, and he did a career in homicide, and just like I had, and realized that it had changed him and not necessarily for the better. You know, his wife was beside him the whole time and encouraged him to seek help. And after he ended up retiring, he goes and seeks help. Now, the funny thing from my perspective, having worked with Tony, so I worked with Tony as a partner. We were incredibly close. We did a lot of traveling together, a lot of teaching together. I was a supervisor for a brief period of time, and I never thought anything was wrong. I actually looked at Tony as like, man, he's the guy that's got it together. He can deal with all this stuff. He still has a great family balance. Like
he seems squared away.
Yep, 100%. And not to say he wasn't, because he was. He's was a phenomenal investigator, great, just a great person, a role model of mine. But I didn't realize he was hurting until he actually took the step and retired. And was going to start the Compassion Alliance and approached me about coming on to the board and getting it launched off the ground with him. And that was the first time that he was comfortable sharing with me that the things he had seen on the job had impacted him and that he needed help.
You've been partners for a decade.
Yes.
But he had never opened up.
Nope. And I never would have seen it. There were guys that I had worked with in my career that I 100% could point to and say, man, that guy's struggling and needs help. And I've reached out and I've tried to support other peers, but him, I never would have seen it coming. Tony, as he was retiring and he was wrapping his stuff up, he approached me and said, hey, this is something that's dear to me. I want to start a nonprofit. I want you on board. Here's what our mission is. Here's what we want to do is we want to be, we didn't really, even at that time, know fully what it was going to look like, but we knew we wanted to make sure that guys that had experienced the things that we experienced knew that there was somewhere to turn for help. That there was going to be some way for them, whether it was wanting to avoid the stigma of going through the agency or their employee assistance plan or their health benefits or their unions or whatever, just wanting to connect them with people that knew what they were doing as far as treating this stuff. And again, we didn't at the onset, we didn't know what that looked like, but I knew one thing was for sure. When he asked me, I wanted to be involved. I don't want anybody else to ever walk through their career not thinking that there's an answer out there or there's a way for them to get help. You don't have to wait until the damage is there to seek help. It's okay to do the preventative medicine, to get those coping. Yep. Be proactive and early in your career, get engaged and get connected with a therapist and get those tools. So when you are confronting those ugly things, you're better equipped to deal with it, because that's one thing that I know. I know when I went through the police academy, nobody was talking about this kind of stuff, and it is getting better. We're talking about it now. We're giving officers some of the tools now to deal with it, but only recently.
Yeah.
For the first time in my career, in the last year, I experienced an in-service training that dealt with officer wellness.
Yeah.
And talked about some of these things. In a 20-year career, that was the first time, I had that experience. And so we are getting there, but we're getting there slowly. So, let's set guys up on the forefront to get those tools in place to help. And if we normalize this, we tear away those stigmas. We stop it's not okay to be okay. We stop that from happening, and we normalize this in conversation, and we normalize guys being able to say, you know what, that was something really screwed up. Maybe I need to talk to somebody about that. And then we don't get so far down the hole where guys are going 10, 15, 20 years of experiencing the cumulative trauma before finally something happens that pushes them over the edge. And hopefully we can save them before we end up in the suicide or we end up in the destructive behaviors that destroy lives. Hopefully we can pull them back before then, but let's not ever get there in the first place. Yeah. That would be the best thing that we could ever do. And that's part of what we want to do with the Compassion Alliance is normalize this conversation. It is okay not to be okay. Somebody is here with you. There is somebody that'll be here by your side. We're here to help.
So once you get past the denial phase, it's like, okay, I obviously am having some health problems or relational problems or whatever else. What then are the obstacles that officers still have? What are the excuses they make not to get help?
Well, and some it's still the stigma. Well, if I admit I need help, then I acknowledge I'm broken.
Okay.
Or I'm too far gone, I'm not fixable. These are all things that I've actually heard come out of people's mouths.
I'm not worth saving.
Yep, yeah. I'm not worth saving, or I'm weak because I allowed myself to get this way. These are the things that we hear, and none of these are true. You are worthy. You are worthy of help. You are worthy of getting the support. You're not weak, but it's overcoming those barriers to actually get them to take the next step. Because you're right. Once we get past the denial, professionally, culturally, that's what we're taught from the get-go. You're supposed to be the warrior. You're the strong one. You're the one that's supposed to have it all together. We swoop in when the world's at its worst and, we save the day and then on to the next call, right? That's the life in the day of any first responder. Go in, solve the problem, move on to the next problem because there's always another call holding. And you never really get to deal with decompressing. And then once we accept, okay, something is wrong, it's taking that next step is the hard part because it's, and I've struggled with this, I've struggled with this personally. It's okay. I know that something isn't right and I know that I need to do something about it, but it's like, some part of it is like, I don't want to because I don't want to, am I going to open up the door worse? Am I going to make this whole issue worse? Am I going to subject somebody else? You think about going to talk to a therapist, and you had asked me this question, early on about, some of the, what's the worst day look like? And it's like, I don't want to tell anybody that. I don't want to expose anybody else to that horror. So that's a barrier too.
Yeah. I hate when I hear cops tell the story of going to talk to a counselor or a confidant and then coming away feeling like they traumatized them. Because the person wasn't prepared to hear a cop story. Yeah. Yeah.
And that's a reality. Now, what I will tell you is that therapists out there that exist, especially the ones that, like we work with in our network that are trained in dealing with first responders, they're prepared to hear that.
Yes.
That's kind of a misnomer too, is that you don't have to tell all the dirty details of whatever it is that you experienced to be able to get tools to help you process and deal with them. You don't have to share every little detail with the therapist of what that looks like just to be able to get help in dealing with it.
Right. I almost wonder if sometimes when someone, whether it's a professional therapist or whether, like I said, it's a confidant or somebody wants to come help an officer, and I sometimes think the officer will put the worst story out there to see if they can be scared off. And that's a way of avoidance. That's a way of like, well, I don't really want help, and so I'm going to scare you off so you don't try to help me anymore.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think I see that. But then let me ask, so some officers avoid looking for help because of wrong-headed reasons. They believe a lie that they are not worthy or that no one is able to help them, whatever that may be. but sometimes they have a more legitimate reason. And I'm curious how you respond to that. If an officer says, well, I'd like to get help, but I mean, they'll take away my specialty job that I have. You know, I'm on the SWAT team or there's some other responsibility that I have. They'll take that away. And this will interfere with my career. It'll interfere with my promotions. I don't want the department thinking that I need to be on the rubber gun squad or to be behind a desk for the rest of my career. So what's your response to somebody who says I can't get help because it'll destroy what I love about law enforcement?
The first thing I'll say about that is part of the reason that the Compassion Alliance exists, because we do recognize that as a reality. There are plenty of guys out there that think like that. And, and unfortunately, I would hope that there's no departments left out there that would consider doing that to their personnel just because they sought help for something that was going on. Departments should be encouraging this. But I'm sure there are departments out there that maybe would hold that against the officer. I think a lot of times that's not necessarily a well-founded fear. I understand it. I understand where they're coming from because I've had it myself.
The actual number of supervisors and administrators who will punish you for asking for help are very few and far between.
Absolutely.
They're not actually that many of those out there. I mean, there might be some, but yeah.
And that's what I'm saying. I'm sure there probably are some out there. I would hope not in this day and age. I mean, because what's the number one rule of leadership? We take care of our people, right?
Yeah.
Hopefully, agencies, there are no agencies out there that would really hold that against somebody, but it is something that guys legitimately think. They think that if I do ask for help, I am going to have this experience. And that's what we do with the Compassion Alliance is it's completely confidential. You come to us and say, hey, I'm a cop here, or I'm a firefighter here, or I'm a paramedic here, and I need help. We're not going to involve your agency.
What does that look like? If I'm an officer and I come to you and say, hey, I am not comfortable going within my system where I'm located, I want help from Compassion Alliance. What do you do for them? And how do you solve some of these fears and problems that they have?
So the very first thing that we're going to do is we're going to let them know that, hey, look, it's okay to not be okay. We're glad you reached out for help, and we're here to support you and make sure that you get the help that you are seeking, because we've been there. Okay. We know what it's like to walk in their shoes. 99% of the time, they're going to talk to Tony, who he's going to be their first contact with our organization. Tony, as we've already talked about, is a career cop. He's recently retired from law enforcement. If Tony's not available, they're probably going to get me, and I'm still an active cop. So that's who they're going to be dealing with. So the first thing we're going to tell them is, hey, look, it's okay to not be okay. We're here for you. We're here to support you. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to find out where they're at, because even though we're headquartered in Arizona, we work all across the United States.
Okay.
Anywhere in the United States, don't care where you work, doesn't matter. If you're a first responder, and we will find a way to help you. The next thing that we do is we want to get them connected with a therapist that is in their area, because even though we have the ability to connect them with a telehealth platform, when they decide they want this help, they want to go see somebody in person, face to face, and have that contact. And so if we don't already have a therapist in the area where you're located, we ask you for 72 hours. Okay. Give us 72 hours for us to find somebody in the area that has experience in working with first responders. We will contact them. We will negotiate a rate with them. And then we're going to set you up with 5 sessions. And we're going to cover the cost of that. You're not going to pay a penny out of pocket. That's, like I said, at the very beginning, we're a 501c3. We work strictly off of donations. That's where our revenue comes from to be able to offer these services. A lot of first responders don't even need the 5. Okay. They can get in 2 or 3 sessions and deal with something that's going on. And then we have the flip side of that where, hey, maybe they need more than 5 sessions to deal with what's going on. Our standard operating procedure is 5 sessions. We're going to cover those financially. We don't involve your agency. We don't involve your insurance. We're not doing any of those things. We're going to set you up with a therapist.
You have an obligation to report back to that agency?
No, we do not. Zero obligation to report back to that agency. This is completely confidential. Yeah, we're going to ask you your name. We're going to ask you, where you are and who you work for, because obviously, we obviously want to verify your first responder, and we want to get you connected with somebody in your area. But beyond that, that's where that ends. And the goal for us is to really remove the barriers for the first responder who's finally said, "Hey, I'm ready. Help me."
Excellent. So if an officer is listening to this right now, and maybe there's somebody who has received help in the past, and they know how valuable it can be, how can they help you help other officers?
Anybody that has had the experience, whether it was us that connected them or whether they went out and sought it on their own, we would love to hear about their experience, because we're here to learn. Tell us about what worked for them and what, I'm really interested in knowing what caused them to choose to get help, and what that experience was like for them. And we can share that with others.
What else can they do to help?
Of course, spread the word. If your listeners are listening to this podcast and they're like, "I'm good," I promise you, somebody that needs help. I promise you that somebody you're working alongside needs help. Tell them about us. Connect them
John,
with
you're
us.
too humble. I'm trying to get you to ask for money.
This is the hard part of this for both Tony and I. We're career cops. We're not used to doing
Don't
this.
ask
And this
for
has been
stuff, right? Yeah.
this has been a slow learning curve, right? That's the personality. So yes, the bottom line is it takes money to do this. I would love, I wish that, all the money in the world fell out of the sky, but it doesn't. We've had some great partners, in individual donors and corporate sponsorships. We've had some great folks lock arms with us and just say, we want to help our first responders. And so that's the other side of it. It takes money to make this work. I wish it didn't, but that's the reality. And so, I want to make sure that we never have to tell somebody no, and that, that we can open up for any first responder that says, I need help, because that may be the only one time that they ask for it. And, we've talked about that. It takes something to work up the courage to even, one, accept that you need it, and two, to go out and seek the answer and do it. So the last thing I want to do is turn somebody away because we don't have the funding.
Corporate partners, nonprofit partners, individuals making tax-deductible donations, all of that, those are all relevant to what you're doing.
100%. And we are a 501c3. So, you do get all the tax breaks that come with that. And, but we just, we want to be able to help as many people as we can. And it does take the money to do that.
Fantastic. John, thank you for doing what you do, both as an officer and with Compassion Alliance. I'm just thrilled that you're out there doing this.
Well, I appreciate that, but at the end of the day, it's not about us. It's just about getting the men and women who serve all of us every day the help that they need.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I want to thank John for talking to me today, and I want to thank Compassion Alliance for focusing specifically on getting first responders over that huge hurdle of getting help for the first time. I think it would be amazing if you would go to their website and learn more about them, get involved. But I also know that there is somebody in this audience who has connections and can put a major corporation or charitable foundation or mega donor in touch with John, so the Compassion Alliance can help more cops and never have to turn someone away. Now, John and I talked for quite a while, and near the end of the conversation, he brought up yet another great facet of what Compassion Alliance does. So check this out.
One of the things I forgot to talk about, and I just got sidetracked with our conversation, and it's one of the things that makes us unique as an organization, is that we don't just help first responders, we also help spouses of first responders and retirees. And as far as we know, and obviously I'd encourage anybody who knows differently to let us know if there's other organizations. But as far as I know, we're the only organization doing that. There's lots of organizations out there that are doing similar things. They're offering help to first responders, but spouses of first responders and retirees are just a forgotten class of people.
Yes, spouses are often left out, and
100%.
That's chronically a problem all over the place. But retirees get thrown into the memory hole, and their own departments neglect them. And so
100%.
certainly on a national level, you just get forgotten about.
And that's exactly right. Retirees, it's like, you do your 20 years, your 25 years, whatever it is, and they hand you your plaque and they push you out the door. And, you're nothing but a memory and a story that somebody tells somewhere, until all those people are gone. And the reality is that a lot of the retirees went through their careers and never asked for help, especially, the guys that are leaving the profession now, because that stigma existed. That stigma existed when I started. I've been doing it 20 years. And that stigma didn't go away until really recently. So we've got a lot of guys out there that did this job for a lot of years, and nobody ever told them it was okay to not feel okay about the things that you've experienced. And certainly nobody's willing to help them. And, a lot of these guys no longer have access to their, EAP plans or the union stuff or the other vehicles that exist for getting help. Certainly they don't have access to the department's wellness programs. I mean, there are departments out there that are doing some great things with officer wellness and are getting ahead of these issues, but the retirees don't get any of that.
Almost always left out. Almost always. I mean, not everywhere, but man, it's rare that a department and a community actively engages their retirees. And it's difficult to do because they scatter and they are nevertheless part of the problem. What keeps me up at night is I see how bad our first responder suicide rates are, but I know that those numbers rarely capture the people that have been separated from service for a few years.
And they don't.
Yeah.
And they don't. Yeah. And that's the crazy thing. I mean, we saw the shift in the past couple of years where officers were more likely to commit suicide than they were die in a felonious assault.
Yeah.
But those numbers aren't considering the retirees. They're not even thinking about them because they're gone. They're away from the profession now. And, you don't think, there's.
But the alcohol abuse, the destructive behavior, the divorce rate, and the suicide rate are all still relevant 5 years after you're separated from service. And so,
they are. And I'd be willing to bet. I mean, I don't know of any studies out there, but I'd be willing to bet they may even be worse because for a lot of guys, the only thing that kept the substance abuse and all that in check was I don't want to destroy my career. Well, once you're retired, you no longer have that concern. So, the inhibition goes away.
They didn't want to destroy their career. They also didn't want to let down their friends.
Right.
Well, now their friends are no longer part of the picture.
Yeah.
And so they're out there on an island by themselves, and all of those things can get so much worse, and sometimes they do, and nobody's there to help. And so I appreciate Compassion Alliance, paying attention to the retirees. And I know a lot of retirees listen to the show. I hope they are checking on each other and know that there's somewhere like Compassion Alliance to reach out to and get some help. Here's a quick editorial note. I finished this episode and the episode to follow, the first episode that'll be in the month of March, and then tragedy struck. After the victory parade for the Kansas City Chiefs here in our lovely city, there was a terrible shooting. Bystanders were shot, a person was killed, children were involved. It was terrible. And people that I know and care about were right there in the middle of it. This terrible tragedy happened just outside of Union Station, the large historic train station here in Kansas City. And that's relevant to the podcast schedule because the promo that I have for this episode, for the upcoming episode that'll come up, episode number 79, is about a shooting at our historic Union train station. The shooting happened in 1933. It's not at all related to the terrible events that happened just recently, but I had to make a decision about my publication schedule in light of recent events. One option would have been to cancel that episode, to put it on the shelf, maybe never use that episode, and go with something else. And I could have pursued that, but honestly, I'm not sure that that's really necessary. First of all, I'm not covering the events that happened in 2024. I don't do current events. I'm not interested in reporting the news. That's not what this show is for. Secondly, the event that happened in 1933 is unrelated to this, except for its location. It happened in the same place, but the circumstances are completely different, and there's a 91-year gap in between the two. Third, the nature of podcasting is that a lot of people listen to these shows time shifted. And so even though for us in Kansas City, this is a very sensitive subject, and just the idea of a shooting at Union Station is frankly traumatizing, a lot of people are going to listen to this show months or years from now. And many people listening to this show, thousands of people listening to this show, have no connection to Kansas City whatsoever. And they may not even know anything about the Super Bowl or the Kansas City Chiefs or anything like that. And I have absolutely no way to predict what they would be sensitive to in whatever time frame they do listen to the show. In fact, every topic I cover could potentially be stepping on a toe or hitting a raw nerve for somebody somewhere. And I don't think I can avoid that. The nature of the show being what it is, I'm not even sure that I should avoid that. So episode 79, which will air in March of 2024, will cover a shooting that happened in 1933, but happened at the same location as a tragic shooting in February of 2024. Here's the original promo, unaltered. Listener discretion is advised. On the next episode of Hey Chaplain.
They are descended upon by Pretty Boy Floyd, Vern Miller, and Adam Ricchetti. And what is written is that the bad guys, closed in on them and said, up, put them up, with their guns. Well, Lackey is in the back seat, and he can see that they're being descended upon by, the criminals. So he pulls up Otto Reed's gun.
The modified shotgun. Yeah.
And he engages a shell, and it goes off, and it blows Frank Nash's head off, and a pellet that Otto Reed used to load his own guns hit the side temple of Agent Caffrey. Just one little piece of homemade buckshot, and it was enough to enter into his skull, and it killed him. And it's probably likely that Lackey still had not figured out what was going on with the gun because he engaged it again. And so it went off again. And they think, and it's probably true, that one of the officers standing outside was probably killed again by friendly fire.
Oh, wow.
So you probably have at least 2 cops that were killed by friendly fire.
And here's a palate-cleansing short story. The chaplain's calm countenance countered the cop's furrowed brow while cold coffee cups were filled with fresh liquid encouragement. The chaplain quipped, "Take courage, Captain, and recall the compassion that kept you here." This was contemplated, and then quickly a flicker of hope chased away the calloused look from the cop's chapped cheeks, and he cracked a careful smile. Coffee and comfort. Just what I was looking for, Chaplain. The preceding alliterative short story was sponsored by the sensible listeners who support this show, and they buy me a $5 virtual coffee at buymeacoffee.com/HeyChaplain. You really don't have to do that. You are already getting the show for free, but thank you for making it possible for police officers to hear something positive. The views expressed here are the personal views of the host and our guest and do not necessarily represent the views of any law enforcement agency or its components. If you like this episode, please share it with a cop or someone who loves a cop. Thank you for listening to Hey Chaplain, and as always, pray for peace in our city.